This is a Sports Catastrophe production. Hey there, Heather Ho, there's Jeff Diamond welcoming you to another Sports Catastrophe birthday boy. And the birthday boy for today, October the 11th, is an NFL legend who played primarily for the San Francisco 49ers in his 15 years in the league. He even played in the USFL beforehand and was one of the star quarterbacks at Brigham Young University. He's a two-time MVP, 92 and 94, and won the Super Bowl MVP in Super Bowl 29. He's a member of the College Football and Pro Football Hall of Fame. He is a star running back. Well, he ran pretty good for a quarterback, and he was, I think, the greatest left-handed player for quarterback ever in the NFL. He is Steve Young, who's 61 years old today. So Steve Young was born in Salt Lake City. And obviously, if you're in Salt Lake City, you're probably in the land of the Mormons and all that. North Carolina actually wanted to recruit him. All that. But Young instead chose BYU, closer to home, and gets the Mormon faith and all that. Anyway, he couldn't throw the ball that well, and BYU thought they should make him a defensive back. But he worked hard and then succeeded Jim McMahon as BYU's starting quarterback. Once McMahon went to the NFL, then Steve Young was made there. But his 83 senior season was spectacular. He would pass for 3,902 yards and 33 touchdowns, and completed 71% of his passes, which was an NCAA single-season record. BYU averaged over 584 yards of total offense per game, which was pretty amazing, and it set a record. The Cougars were 11-1, but somehow they didn't win the national title, even though that they beat Missouri in the '83 Holiday Bowl. They were not the number one team. That was down to the famous Nebraska-Miami game, Orange Bowl. BYU would get their national title in 1984 after Steve Young left for the pros and all that. He was named the National Quarterback of the Year. So it was amazing and all that. So anyway, Steve Young was taken in the first round of the 1984 USFL draft. And then he decided to sign a 10-year, $40 million contract with the Express. That was huge. And he actually agreed to take his payment in the form of an annuity paid out over 40 years. So if that went through, then he still owed money because of that. So that was huge. And everyone thought Steve Young was going to be the number one pick in the '84 draft. And that Cincy would get that thing. But, it didn't happen that way. Anyway, Cincy and Tampa would play hot potato with the first overall pick, but the New England Patriots ended up with the number one pick, and they took Irving Fryer from Nebraska. So yeah, even that Cincy would take the number one pick. They still had Ken Anderson at quarterback, and they figured that Young would sit behind Anderson for the '84 season, coming back in '85. Young did not like that, and LA said that he could be the star quarterback and all that. Young was convinced on what the LA Express wanted, so he went to the USFL. They got Mike Rozier and Herschel Walker, so the NFL must be not doing that well. However, Steve Young had to miss some time in his rookie season in the USFL because he was taking college courses to graduate on time. And he did very well. Los Angeles still didn't have a feeling for the Express. I mean, they had the Raiders and the Rams to worry about. Unfortunately, the LA owner's finances suggested that he's not as well off as he claimed and all that. And then he stopped paying the Express's bills and all that. So anyway, the league took control of Los Angeles' stuff and gave him the bare minimum. So anyway, it was a fiasco for LA in '85. Before one game, the bus driver refused to drive the LA Express to their final home game, which was moved to Los Angeles Pierce College. As he was paid. So they had to take money and all that. Steve Young had to play running back because the team had no healthy running backs. And the Express couldn't get any money to replace injured players. And then Young said he had insured the contract and that his annuity will be paid till 2027. But then in 1985, it was revealed that he had a $1.4 million settlement on the annuity. The league ceased operations in '86. So Steve Young would go to the NFL. So Steve Young was out of it. He's out of LA and signed with Tampa, who actually made him the first pick in the supplemental draft. So Tampa signed him. And the Bucks were not doing that well. Steve Young only played 2 years for Tampa. And as a starter, he was 3-16, which was not really that great. Tampa was in an array of problems. Hugh Culverhouse, the owner, was penny pinching to the point penny pinching was terrible. Young was deemed a bust, and Tampa decided in the '87 draft to take Vinny Testaverde first overall. And then Tampa decided to trade Steve Young to San Francisco. And of course, Bill Walsh was impressed by Steve Young and figured that the lack of talent around Steve in Tampa was why Young wasn't seeming to be that good. So yeah, he would be Joe Montana's backup and all that. The Bucks got 2nd and 4th round picks in the trade. They took Winston Moss and Bruce Hill respectively. Moss was okay. Bruce Hill not so much. So Young would be playing behind Montana as backup for 4 years. But he was a good backup. He actually helped beat the Bears in a 41-0 game by throwing 4 touchdown passes. After Minnesota shockingly took a 27-10 lead in the 1988 divisional round against the Vikings over the Niners, Steve Young replaced Montana. He did pretty well. He had a touchdown and a pick, and he even ran one in, but it wasn't enough. Steve Young made one of the best runs ever by a quarterback, October 1988, when he kept stumbling and bumbling, but he ran for a 49-yard game-winning touchdown against the Vikings. That win actually helped the Niners win the division and get the 2 seed, and win the Super Bowl in '89. And he displayed potential. He could be the #1 guy, but Montana did win the MVP award. Young did play some games and got 1,000 passing yards, 8 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He looked pretty good. In 4 years as a backup, he threw 23 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. But Steve Young was thrusted into the limelight in the '91 NFC title game between the Giants and the Niners. As after Montana got an injury thanks to the sack by Leonard Marshall, Young had to be pressed to be the starter and all that. But he got off to a rough start, especially with the Roger Craig fumble that cost him dearly. But when he had to take over for the entire '91 season with Montana hurt, they were 4-4. It didn't look that good. Steve Young suffered a knee injury, and Steve Bono had to come in to clean up the mess. Young did his job in that season. The Niners won 10 games, but they did not make the playoffs. Missing the playoffs for the first time in 9 years. He still did good. And people thought that Steve Young was probably done for because Montana was coming back from injury and Bono did quite well. So there was a rumor that San Fran was training Steve Young to the Raiders, but they couldn't materialize the deal. And Montana couldn't recover in time to start. So Montana didn't even play till the final game of the season. And he helped the Niners win that game in the second half. Steve Young did well in the 92 season, helping his team win 14 games, which was amazing and all of that. They beat the Skins in the divisional round, but lost the NFC title game to Dallas. It was like, wow. They were on home turf trying to get a title, and Steve Young was our buddy. Threw 2 interceptions in that game. But he still got the MVP award, which was pretty impressive. So, anyway. But they still wanted Joe Montana to be the starter for San Fran in 93. But Montana decided to request a trade. Instead of them trading Steve Young, they traded Montana to Kansas City. So Young was the undisputed starter. Young had a thumb injury and kept throwing interceptions, but over a span of 7 games after his thumb healed, he had 16 touchdown passes, 2 interceptions. Young would be a legend. The team would slip to a 10-6 mark, but they still won a trip to the NFC title game, but in Dallas this time, and they lost 38-21. So the Niners were poised to try to win a Super Bowl for the 94-95 season. Deion Sanders was coming to San Francisco, and Young looked pretty good. Young helped them out. They won 13 games, home field advantage through the NFC playoffs. And Steve Young was actually taken out of games early by George Seifert, when the Niners had an insurmountable lead. The Niners survived Dallas's attempt to beat them at the NFC title game. And then he went to the Super Bowl. And Steve Young just threw the ball like there was no tomorrow. He threw 6 touchdown passes, which surpassed Montana's 5. Steve Young was Super Bowl 30 MVP. They went 49-26, and he did quite well and all that. He actually ran for 49 yards, which was the most by any player on San Fran or San Diego. And then he famously wanted the monkey taken off his back because, Montana's performances, Young could take the monkey off his back. Young was given the MVP award. He was the 7th player to win both league and Super Bowl MVPs in the same season. Unfortunately, the Niners couldn't come back that well. They were eliminated 3 straight times by the Green Bay Packers, twice in San Francisco. At age 37 in 98, people thought his skills were diminished. However, he put up 4,170 passing yards, 36 touchdowns, the most in his career, and he's 37. The Niners did win the wildcard game against the Packers thanks to Terrell Owens making the catch too, even though that Jerry Rice had that fumble. That should have been a fumble. Oh, no. Young, unfortunately, shockingly lost to the Atlanta Falcons in the division round 2018. In the 99 season, it would be his last in the NFL. He had concussion problems and all that. He was knocked out of the 3rd game against the Cardinals, being finally hit by Ernest Williams. So he had post-concussion syndrome, and he couldn't do it. So Steve Young was actually offered the starting quarterback job in Denver, which would have been weird how he would replace an icon like John Elway. But because of his concussions, he had to retire. Anyway, so he played 2 seasons in the USFL. Didn't do that well, as far as I know. In the NFL, he played 169 regular season games, threw for 232 touchdowns, 107 interceptions, 33,000 plus passing yards. And, he had a good playoffs still, too. He had a legacy and all that. He still has the 6th highest passer rating in history, but the 2nd highest among retired players behind Tony Romo. His 4,239 yards is 4th in the NFL behind Michael Vick, Cam Newton, and Randall Cunningham. He had many records. In the NFL, he actually has the most times led the league in passer rating with 6. Doing it 6 times, tying with Sammy Ball. Most consecutive times leading the league in passer rating 4 from 91 to 94. One of 7 quarterbacks to lead the league in touchdown passes 4 or more times. Tying in with Johnny Unitas, Brett Favre, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, and Len Dawson. Most touchdown passes in a playoff game 6. Well, that's tied with Darryl LaMonica and Tom Brady, but he did it in the Super Bowl, which he has that record. Most rushing yards by a quarterback in a postseason career and touchdowns, 594 yards, 8 touchdowns. He has many Niners records, including most touchdown passes in one season, 36 in 1998, best passer rating, 112.8 in 94, completion percentage, 70.3 in 94, 300 plus yard passing games in 98, and he was good, all that. So he's enshrined into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2005, and a few years later, he got number 8 retired. He's actually the only Niner who wore number 8 ever. So anyway. He liked Real Cougar. He got his law degree at BYU. He was in a few acting things. He was in episode of Frasier and Lois the Clark, The Adventures of Superman. He was in Wings, the NBC comedy series. Young actually almost was part of the movie There's Something About Mary, but he turned down the role because of his staunch Mormonism, his Mormon views. So Brett Favre got the spot, or Favre. And of course, Mary says, "What did I tell you? I'm a Niners fan." Anyway, Young is actually the great-great-great-grandson of Brigham Young, the man who, founded Mormonism and settled in Utah, and that's why Brigham Young University is named that way. Oh, he was the 2nd president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or the Mormons. I think it was 1st. Anyway, Young has been married to Barbara Graham since 2000, 4 kids. So yeah, Steve Young was the quarterback we all thought he would be. And screw those Niner fans saying that Joe Montana was better. Yes, Montana won more Super Bowls and all that, but Steve Young helped the Niners do well. But, maybe Montana was better than Young. Maybe. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond.